Dog cries beside a river. When fishermen investigate, they uncover a dark secret. The river whispered secrets to the wind, its surface shimmering under a pale, reluctant sun. The surrounding forest stood eerily silent, as if holding its breath, with towering pines casting long, skeletal shadows over the water. It was an ordinary morning for the fishermen who worked along the secluded banks, until a heart-wrenching sound shattered the stillness. A dog's mournful cry echoed through the misty air, raw and unrelenting, drawing the attention of two men unloading nets from their weathered boat. "What in the world?" murmured Elias, a grizzled fisherman with salt and pepper hair and hands calloused by years of labor. His younger companion, Daniel, squinted toward the direction of the sound, his brow furrowing. "Sounds like it's in trouble," Daniel said, already moving toward the source. Elias hesitated. Could be a wild one, might not want company. But the cries grew louder, tugging at something primal in their hearts. It wasn't the sound of an animal merely hurt or scared. It carried a depth of sorrow that seemed almost human. Against his better judgment, Elias followed Daniel toward the thick underbrush lining the riverbank. As they pushed through the brambles, the sound sharpened, becoming unbearably close. And then they saw it. A golden retriever, its fur matted with mud and leaves, sitting rigidly by the water's edge. The dog's head was tilted upward, its amber eyes glistening with tears that seemed to mirror the river's flow. It released another mournful howl that sent chills racing down the men's spines. "Hey there, buddy," Daniel called softly, kneeling a few feet away. The dog didn't flinch. Its gaze remained fixed on the water as if it were trying to speak through its cries. "Do you think it's hurt?" Elias asked, keeping his distance. Daniel shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think it's crying for itself." The two men exchanged a glance, unease settling in their chests. They approached cautiously, careful not to startle the animal. As they drew closer, Daniel noticed something strange. The ground beneath the dog was disturbed, clawed at as if it had been digging in desperation. "Look at this," Daniel said, pointing to the churned-up earth. "It's like it's trying to show us something." Elias frowned, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. But curiosity and perhaps guilt won out. "Maybe there's something in the water," he suggested reluctantly. He knelt beside the dog, whose cries softened into pitiful whimpers as it cast a pleading look at the men. Daniel nodded, stepping to the riverbank and peering into the murky depths. At first, he saw nothing but his own reflection rippling on the surface. Then something caught his eye, a faint glint just below the water partially obscured by reeds. "Elias, I think there's something down there." Elias joined him, squinting at the spot Daniel pointed to. "Could be debris," he said, though his voice wavered. "Or—" He didn't finish the thought. Without hesitation, Daniel kicked off his boots and waded into the freezing water. The cold bit at his legs, but he pressed on, the glint growing clearer with each step. He reached down, his fingers brushing against something solid. With a sharp tug, he pulled it free and stumbled back toward the shore. "What is it?" Elias asked, his tone a mix of dread and curiosity. Daniel held it up, a small, rusted metal box, heavy with the weight of its contents. The padlock securing it was corroded but intact. "Why would a dog be crying over this?" he murmured, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. Elias shook his head. "Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's—" The dog barked sharply, cutting him off. It stepped closer to the box, pawing at it and whining with renewed urgency. Elias' skepticism wavered. There was no denying the dog's distress. It wasn't random. This animal knew something. "We should open it," Daniel said, already looking for a rock to break the lock. "Wait." Elias raised a hand, his gaze darting nervously to the forest. The shadows seemed darker now, the air heavier. "We don't know what we're messing with." Daniel hesitated, but the dog barked again, this time with a force that startled them both. Its eyes burned with an intensity that seemed almost otherworldly, as if it were begging them to act. With a deep breath, Daniel raised the rock and brought it down on the lock. The box creaked open, revealing its contents, and what they saw made both men freeze. Inside were scattered photographs, stained by time and water. The faces in the pictures were hauntingly familiar, locals from their own village. And beneath the photographs lay something far more chilling. A single, blood-stained handkerchief embroidered with the initials HW. "What the hell is this?" Elias whispered, his voice trembling. The dog let out a low growl, its gaze fixed on the forest behind them. It was no longer crying. It was warning. What do you think the dog knew? And who or what could be watching from the shadows? Stay tuned as the mystery deepens. The forest seemed to press in closer around Elias and Daniel as they stared at the eerie contents of the rusted box. The dog, now silent, stood rigidly, its ears twitching as if picking up sounds the men couldn't hear. It pawed the ground anxiously, casting quick glances at the treeline. "What's this supposed to mean?" Daniel asked, holding up one of the photographs. It was faded but still clear enough to make out a group of people standing near the same riverbank, smiling in celebration. Fishing poles and baskets filled with freshly caught fish suggested a festive occasion. Elias leaned over to inspect it, his face darkening. "That's Henry Walters," he muttered, pointing to a tall man at the center of the photo. "He went missing years ago. People said he drowned after a storm swept through. But they never found his body," Daniel said, finishing the thought. The box's contents suddenly took on a more sinister tone. Daniel carefully sifted through the photographs, finding others of Henry, one of him laughing beside his boat, another of him shaking hands with a local politician. But then the images changed. The smiles were gone, replaced by shots of Henry looking tense, standing with different people whose faces seemed deliberately obscured in shadow. Elias pulled out the blood-stained handkerchief, holding it like it might burn him. This doesn't make any sense. Why would this dog lead us to something connected to Henry?" The dog growled low again, snapping their attention to the forest. The air was unnaturally still, the usual chorus of birds and insects absent. It felt as though the woods themselves were holding a secret. "We can't stay here," Elias said firmly, stuffing the box's contents back inside. "Whatever this is, it's not for us to figure out. We take it to the authorities and let them." Before he could finish, the dog barked sharply, cutting him off. It darted toward the treeline, then stopped abruptly, looking back at them with an urgency that was impossible to ignore. "It wants us to follow," Daniel said, rising to his feet. "Follow it where?" "Into the middle of nowhere." Elias shook his head. "This is insane. We don't even know what we're dealing with." But the dog barked again, more insistent this time, before disappearing into the shadows. Daniel didn't hesitate. "I'm going," he said. "You can stay here if you want." With a frustrated groan, Elias relented, trailing behind him. "This better not get us killed." The forest grew denser as they followed the dog, the light dimming with each step. The ground was uneven, littered with roots and fallen branches that snagged at their boots. The dog moved, swiftly, pausing only to ensure they were still following. Its tail was down, its body language tense, as if it were bracing for something. What could this animal possibly know? Elias muttered, his breath labored. "It's a dog, not a detective." Daniel didn't answer. He was too focused on the path ahead and the eerie familiarity of their surroundings. "This area feels off," he said after a moment. "I don't remember ever coming this far into the woods." "That's because people don't," Elias said. "These woods have always had stories. People disappearing, strange lights at night." "You actually believe that stuff?" Daniel asked, though his voice lacked conviction. "I believe there's truth in every story," Elias replied grimly. The dog suddenly stopped, its body low to the ground. It growled softly, its hackles rising as it stared at something ahead. Daniel squinted, his heart skipping a beat when he saw what the dog was fixated on. A clearing up ahead with a small, dilapidated cabin. The structure looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The roof sagged, moss-covered shingles barely clinging to the wood. Windows were boarded up haphazardly, and the front door hung slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. "This just keeps getting better," Elias muttered. The dog barked once, its tone sharper than before, then trotted toward the cabin. Daniel followed, ignoring the sinking feeling in his chest. "What's in there?" he whispered to himself, stepping onto the creaking porch. Elias grabbed his arm. "Wait, this could be dangerous. There's no telling who or what might be inside." Daniel hesitated but then gestured toward the dog, who was now sitting by the door, staring at them expectantly. "It's brought us this far. We can't turn back now." With a deep breath, Daniel pushed the door open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere within. The dog entered first, its paws patting softly on the rotting floorboards. The cabin was sparsely furnished. A broken table, a few overturned chairs, and a rusted stove in one corner. But what caught their attention was the wall opposite the entrance. It was covered in photographs much like the ones in the box. Some were torn, others pinned haphazardly with rusted nails, but all shared a common theme: Henry Walters. "Why are there so many pictures of him?" Daniel whispered, stepping closer. Elias examined the wall, his stomach twisting as he recognized more familiar faces. "These aren't just of Henry. Look." He pointed to a photograph of a young woman who had vanished years ago, her disappearance chalked up to a tragic accident. Another showed a local shopkeeper who'd reportedly moved away without warning. "These are all people from the village, people who went missing." Daniel's hands shook as he reached for a piece of paper pinned beneath one of the photos. It was a handwritten note, the ink smudged but still legible. The words made his blood run cold. "The river keeps the secrets we cannot, but secrets never stay buried forever." A sharp noise behind them made both men spin around. The dog was growling at something in the corner of the room, its teeth bared. A trapdoor, previously obscured by shadows, was now visible. The edges were worn, the handle rusted but still functional. "No," Elias said, shaking his head. "Absolutely not." Daniel ignored him, kneeling to inspect the trapdoor. The dog whined softly, as if urging him to proceed. "There's something down there," he said, gripping the handle. "Yeah, and it's probably something we don't want to find," Elias snapped. "Let's just take what we've got and leave." But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this was the reason the dog had brought them here. With a deep breath, he yanked the door open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading into the earth. A foul stench wafted upward, making both men gag. "Stay here if you want," Daniel said, grabbing a flashlight from his pocket. "I'm going down." Elias cursed under his breath but followed reluctantly. The dog stayed close, its presence both comforting and unsettling as they descended into the darkness. The basement was cold and damp, the air heavy with the smell of mildew and something far worse. The flashlight's beam cut through the gloom, revealing rows of shelves lined with jars of unidentifiable substances. In the center of the room stood an old wooden table, its surface stained and scarred. What is this place?" Elias whispered, his voice trembling. Daniel's flashlight landed on a stack of papers on the table. They were yellowed with age, covered in scrawled handwriting and crude sketches. As he flipped through them, a sickening realization began to take shape. "These are records," he said, his voice hollow. "Records of experiments. On people." Elias backed away, his face pale. This can't be real." But the evidence was undeniable. The sketches depicted human figures, each labeled with notes detailing injuries, disappearances, and crude surgical procedures. One page bore a familiar name. Before they could process the implications, the dog let out a sharp bark, drawing their attention to a corner of the room. There, hidden beneath a tarp, was a large metal trunk. Daniel approached cautiously, his heart pounding as he lifted the cover. Inside were bones, human bones. Who was behind the horrors hidden in the cabin? And how did the dog know to lead them there? Could this discovery be tied to the disappearances haunting their village? Stay tuned as the truth unravels. The sight of the bones stole the breath from both men. They stared in stunned silence, the flashlight's narrow beam casting eerie shadows across the grim discovery. Elias staggered back, his knees buckling as he muttered, This is impossible. What kind of monster would do this?" Daniel clenched his fists, his mind racing. The dog stood beside the trunk, its eyes fixed on him as if waiting for him to make the next move. The bond between them, inexplicable yet undeniable, gave Daniel the courage to keep going. "We have to find out who did this," Daniel said, his voice resolute. "We can't leave this place without answers." Elias looked at him incredulously. "Answers? Look around, Daniel. The answer is clear. Someone used this cabin to kill people. We need to go to the police." "Not yet," Daniel replied. "Something about this doesn't add up. The river, the photographs, the trapdoor. It's all connected somehow. If we leave now, we might lose our only chance to understand why." Before Elias could argue further, the dog barked sharply again, its gaze shifting to another darkened corner of the basement. The sound reverberated through the confined space, and Daniel followed its lead, his flashlight illuminating a small wooden chest tucked into the shadows. Unlike the rest of the room, the chest appeared pristine, as if it had been placed there recently. With trembling hands, Daniel lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of items that sent a chill down his spine. A gold locket engraved with the initials HW, a leather-bound journal, and a small vial filled with a murky liquid. He recognized the locket immediately. It had belonged to Henry Walters, a treasured possession his family had described in the search efforts years ago. Elias, peering over his shoulder, whispered, "That's Henry's. I remember his sister talking about it after he disappeared. Why is it here?" Daniel picked up the journal, its worn cover crackling under his touch. The pages inside were filled with neat handwriting, detailing observations, notes, and dates. As he skimmed through, a horrifying narrative began to emerge. The journal revealed that Henry Walters had uncovered something sinister while fishing near the river. The entries described his discovery of illegal dumping, barrels of chemicals being secretly disposed of into the water by a local company. The chemicals were toxic, poisoning fish and wildlife, but worse, Henry wrote about seeing what appeared to be human remains discarded among the waste. "I thought it was just some sick accident," one entry read, "but now I'm sure. They're hiding something bigger than I can handle alone." Henry had taken photographs and documented everything he could, intending to expose the truth. But as the entries continued, they became more fragmented and erratic. He wrote of being followed, receiving threats, and finally, a chilling conclusion. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. The river holds secrets, but I won't let them bury me with them." The final entry was dated the night before Henry vanished. Elias cursed under his breath. So this wasn't just a random murder. He knew too much. Daniel nodded, his heart pounding. And someone wanted to silence him. As they pieced together the grim truth, the basement seemed to close in around them. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the dog's soft whine. But then they heard it, a faint creak above them. Both men froze. The sound repeated, louder this time. Footsteps. "Someone's here," Elias hissed, his voice barely audible. Daniel extinguished the flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. The dog pressed against his leg, its body tense but silent, as if it understood the need for stealth. They waited, hearts hammering, as the footsteps grew closer, descending the creaky stairs. A figure emerged at the top of the staircase, holding a lantern that cast flickering light across the basement. The man was older, with weathered features and a sharp, calculating gaze. He wore a fisherman's jacket, the kind commonly seen around the village, but his expression was anything but friendly. "What are you doing here?" the man demanded, his voice low and threatening. Elias was the first to speak, though his voice wavered. We found this place by accident. We didn't mean any harm." The man's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting to the open trunk and the journal in Daniel's hand. His expression darkened. "You shouldn't have come here." Daniel stepped forward, his grip tightening on the journal. "You're the one who's been hiding this, aren't you? The dumping, the murders. It's all connected to you." The man's face twisted into a snarl. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't we?" Daniel shot back. "We know about Henry Walters. We know he tried to expose the truth, and you silenced him." The man's composure cracked for a moment, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. But then his jaw hardened. "Henry was a fool," he spat. "He didn't understand what he was dealing with. The river's poisoned. Sure, but do you think anyone cared? I was just doing what I had to do to keep things quiet." Elias stepped closer, his anger overcoming his fear. "Quiet? You killed people. You dumped their bodies like trash." The man's hand moved to his belt, where a hunting knife gleamed in the lantern light. "And I'll do it again if I have to." The tension broke as the dog lunged at the man, its growl ferocious as it sank its teeth into his arm. The lantern fell, shattering on the floor and plunging the room into chaos. Flames flickered along the spilled oil, casting eerie shadows as the dog fought to subdue the attacker. Daniel and Elias seized the opportunity. Elias grabbed the man's wrist, forcing him to drop the knife, while Daniel wrestled him to the ground. The dog held firm, growling low as if warning the man against further resistance. "You're not getting away with this," Daniel said through gritted teeth, pinning the man's arms behind his back. "The truth's coming out, whether you like it or not." When the authorities arrived, the full extent of the man's crimes came to light. The cabin's basement was revealed to be a dumping ground for both chemical waste and the remains of those who had stumbled too close to the truth. Henry Walters had been one of many victims, his determination to expose the corruption costing him his life. But thanks to the dog's relentless efforts, justice was finally served. The man confessed under pressure, implicating others in the scheme, and the company responsible for the dumping was brought down. As the cabin burned to the ground, Daniel knelt beside the dog, running a hand through its fur. "You knew, didn't you?" he said softly. "You knew we had to find this." The dog licked his hand, its eyes warm and knowing. It had been the true hero all along, guiding them to uncover a truth that had been buried for far too long. What do you think drove the dog to lead Daniel and Elias to the cabin? Could it have been loyalty to Henry Walters or something even deeper? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one. The morning sun cast its golden light across the riverside, its warmth starkly contrasting the grim events of the previous night. The cabin had been reduced to ashes, its secrets exposed to the world. As smoke curled into the sky, Daniel, Elias, and the dog stood on the riverbank, watching the scene unfold with a mix of relief and exhaustion. The authorities had taken the man into custody, and forensics teams were combing through the remnants of the site, piecing together evidence to corroborate his confession. For Daniel, the night's events felt surreal, as though he'd stumbled into a story too dark to belong to his quiet life as a fisherman. But the dog, now named Shadow by Elias, seemed calm and resolute, as if it had always known this day would come. Later that day, Daniel and Elias returned to the village. News of their discovery had spread like wildfire, and the small community was abuzz with shock and grief. The names of the missing, Henry Walters among them, were whispered with a mixture of sorrow and reverence. Families who had long mourned their loved ones now found bittersweet closure in the revelation. "Do you think Shadow belonged to Henry?" Elias asked as they walked through the quiet streets. The dog padded beside them, its tail wagging gently, its presence comforting in a way neither man could explain. "I don't know," Daniel replied, his voice thoughtful. "But there's no denying he led us to the truth. Maybe it was loyalty, or maybe he just understood something we couldn't." Shadow stopped suddenly, his gaze fixed on a memorial plaque near the town square. It bore Henry Walters' name, along with the names of others who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The dog sat down in front of it, his posture solemn, as if paying his respects. A lump formed in Daniel's throat. "You knew, didn't you?" he murmured. "You knew what they needed." The village came together that evening to hold a candlelight vigil by the river. The air was heavy with emotion as families, neighbors, and friends gathered to honor those they had lost. Daniel stood near the water's edge, shadow at his side, feeling the weight of the moment. Elias joined him, a lit candle in his hand. "It's strange," he said. "This river has always been a source of life for us. Fishing, stories, memories, and now we know it's held so much pain too." Daniel nodded. "But it also brought us shadow, and it brought us the truth. Maybe that's its way of healing." As the vigil ended, a woman approached Daniel. She was older, her face lined with years of worry but softened by a tentative smile. She held out a photograph, a young Henry Walters, grinning beside a dog that looked strikingly like Shadow. "This was Henry's dog, Scout," she said, her voice trembling. "He disappeared the same night Henry did. We thought he was gone forever." Daniel looked down at Shadow, who met his gaze with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. "Scout," he whispered. The name felt right, like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. The woman knelt, her hand outstretched. "Scout, is it really you?" Shadow, or Scout, stepped forward, his tail wagging as he licked her hand. Tears streamed down her face as she embraced him, her whispers a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. The days that followed brought a sense of closure to the village. The company responsible for the dumping was shut down, and the river's restoration became a communal effort. The waters, once tainted by greed and malice, began to heal under the care of those who had always cherished them. Daniel and Elias became local heroes, their names spoken with admiration. But they knew the real hero was Scout, the dog whose loyalty had spanned years, guiding them to uncover the truth. He became a beloved figure in the village, a symbol of courage and resilience. On a quiet evening weeks later, Daniel stood by the river, Scout at his side. The waters shimmered under the setting sun, their surface calm and untroubled. Daniel reached down, scratching behind Scout's ears. "You did good, boy," he said softly. "You brought Henry's story back to life, and you gave this village something we thought we'd lost, hope." Scout barked once, a sound full of life and determination, as if to say his work wasn't done yet. Together, they watched the river flow, its currents carrying away the pain of the past and making room for a brighter future. Do you believe animals have a sixth sense for justice or loyalty? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more incredible tales of courage and mystery. Thank you for watching. What a journey this has been. The story of Scout and the dark secrets of the river is one we won't forget anytime soon. It's a powerful reminder of the loyalty and bravery animals can show, even in the most harrowing circumstances. What do you think? Was Scout driven by loyalty to his late owner, Henry Walters, or was it something deeper, something we might never fully understand? Would you have followed Scout's lead, even when the clues pointed toward danger? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you would have handled this mystery. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to give it a thumbs up. Your support helps us create more captivating tales like this one. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll never miss a new story. What's next? Stay tuned for our next gripping tale. Have you ever heard of the cat that warned its owner about an unseen danger? Or the mysterious crow that led police to a hidden clue? These stories and more are coming soon to the channel, so be sure to follow along. Do you believe animals have a sixth sense for danger, loyalty, or justice? Scout's actions were nothing short of extraordinary, and we can't help but wonder what truly drives such deep connections between humans and animals. Let us know your theories in the comments. If you were moved by this tale, share it with your friends and family. It's a story of courage, loyalty, and the triumph of truth, something we all need a little more of in our lives. Thank you for being part of this journey, and we'll see you next time with another unforgettable story.